Alright, this has nothing to do with Star Trek Prodigy, but can we talk about my 10D t-shirt? I just got this in the mail today, and I'm very pleased with it. Hello, interwebs! I am here to review the latest... What episode is this called? Why do I never remember the damn names of these episodes? I literally watch the episode right before I shoot these reviews, and I can never remember the name of any episode that I just watched. Hello, interwebs! I am here to review the latest episode of Star Trek Prodigy, this time Season 1, Episode 12, All of the World's Stage. Little Shakespeare reference in there for you. Staying spoiler-free up front, this was another great episode of Prodigy. Prodigy is just killing it so far these past few episodes. I am loving all of them. I have a few nitpicks with this episode like I've had with the past few, but again, they are the nittiest of nitpicks. Because overall, this was great. Another episode that managed to weave in a fun little episodic adventure that was told over 20 minutes. Managed to tie into some cool references to Star Trek lore in a way that I actually think felt a little bit more natural than earlier on this season's episode, Kobayashi. I was critical of the episode Kobayashi earlier this season for its use of like the holodeck to like have these random cameos from Star Trek Past in there, and I thought it was a little bit not to my liking, even though I didn't hate it as a whole. This episode does something similar, but in a way that I actually found to be much more fun, natural, and creative than we had done in the earlier on in this season. So I really enjoyed all of that. It also tied into a really cool Prime Directive type of story, and also one that felt very it kind of reminded me of Beowulf in a way. There's probably another story that is much more indicative, maybe even a Shakespeare one that's I'm blanking on. But the story told here actually felt a little bit like Beowulf in a few ways, and I loved that. I love when like kids programs like this sort of retell classic stories, so that when kids maybe get to middle school, high school, they'll be like, oh, this is like that episode of Star Trek or something that I saw. I mean, I know I had much the same experience in my youth. I would watch like Star Trek episodes that of like Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and then I would read like classic literature and be like, oh yeah, that's kind of like that Star Trek episode, like the Portrait of Dorian Gray, which was an episode of Next Generation that they adapted. It sort of made me sort of that sort of situation. Beyond that, though, we do get a little piece of information and story momentum with the Admiral Janeway storyline that's been going on all season. I do hope that storyline gets a little bit more propulsive as the season goes, just because I felt like it's just been like little pieces here and there. But I also understand the place that the writers are in. They kind of want to move it forward, but they don't want to like get there fully because they want to have these sort of episodic adventures for our main cast of characters. So I'm of two minds of it. I like it, but there's also like the inner Trekkie in me is like, I want to know more about what's going on with Admiral Janeway and what's going on there. So certainly it's not like at a snail's pace. I'm liking the pacing of it, but I am sort of like excitedly waiting for the next big step in that storyline. So it's not a negative. It's just one that I'm personally excited to see more about. But they have to balance their audiences, and since this is more into kids, I'm sure kids are much more interested in their favorite characters. Not that I don't like our crew of the Protostar. Love them. But again, Admiral Janeway, you're just hitting my Trekkie boxes. I want to know. Anywho, overall, though, great episode. Had a lot of fun with it, but I am going to have to talk about some specifics. So if you have not seen the episode yet, jump off. We're diving into spoilers. So we start off our episode, as I just said, with Admiral Janeway, and the Diviner has woken up, but he's still got his little mishmash memory. He's starting to remember parts of it, but doesn't seem fully there, which, again, is an intriguing place for him to be in, because he may actually think that he's trying to be helpful to Janeway and not necessarily be earnestly manipulating her. But we will probably get to that point when he does remember all of his... I assume he's going to get all of his memory back at some point and be ready to fully manipulate Janeway. But here he does seem earnest, and it's sort of setting Janeway off on a path to be at collision with our Protostar crew. One other interesting piece here, too, is that last episode I was upset because we had reached the Starfleet outpost that we had encountered in the first episode, and Janeway had said there was no survivors. I'm like, did our Denobulan friend die? This episode we learn that his escape pod did land on a planet, and they're going to go after him and probably catch up to him next episode. So curious to see that there, and I'm glad our adorable Denobulan friend, despite him being a little bit of a jerk towards the end of his appearance in the premiere of this season, or mid-season premiere, that he did survive. So curious to see how that is going to go. Jumping over to our Protostar crew, we have Jink and Pog trying to mess with the sort of diviner's weapon on the ship, not being able to do much about it. So they're sort of like trying to figure out time and stall for time in order to learn what they can do with this device. And so they instead decide, well, if we can't go to Starfleet right now, we'll try and help others. So we'll go to this planet that has a distress signal on it. So interesting note there. However, one thing too that I thought about as we eventually discover on this planet, that distress call was a Starfleet distress call. So it's like, are they answering? I know probably the signal didn't say that necessarily, but I'm like, oh, well, if your ship can't interface with Starfleet stuff, even if it's 100 years old, you probably still shouldn't like seek out distress signals that say that, but that's neither here nor there. One other thing too is Murph. We got a mention of this last episode. I didn't really pay too much attention to it, but we see that Murph is feeling sick in this episode and is going to begin a sort of metamorphosis, as it were. We see at the end of the episode that Murph sort of is in this chrysalis sort of thing, so I won't say too much about that other than intriguing. Curious to see where Murph is going to go in the next few episodes. Then we have the crew beaming down to the planet where they discover that there is a whole civilization of people that have built their entire identity on a sort of like telephoned version of Starfleet. They called it Starflight. I loved all of this. The characters that we meet doing like a faux James T. Kirk and Sulu impression, which were actually pretty spot on. I really adored that. I love their like stitched together uniforms. You could nitpick, again, this is like a nittiest of nitpicks about being like, it's a whole civilization where they just have like, no one has like a tailor in their entire like civilization there, that they all have these like piecemealed uniforms. I loved the design, but world building wise, I was a little bit like, they just all like this. But anyways, that's again the nittiest of nitpicks. But I also like loved seeing them doing this play version of the TOS bridge, them like making buttons and like cardboard things to do these plays. It reminded me of like Star Trek in the Park. If you lived in Portland, they used to do like Star Trek episodes, like the scripts of episodes, like play versions of them. So it kind of reminded me of that sort of thing. So just a lot of fun to see that. And we eventually get this backstory, essentially, that we sort of interpreted through this sort of like telephoned lens, that this ensign arrived on their planet, warned them about the gallows, which we later learn is the shuttle Galileo, and tried to protect them from whatever was going on in the woods. And so they have this sort of mysterious mythology based around the woods. They sort of venerate this ensign as well as Starfleet as a whole. And so we have a young girl who went out into the woods and came back and got infected by the gallows, which is also starting to infect Dahl because he touched her. And so we have Zero trying to create an antidote, but obviously both of them are getting infected. And I like Dahl sort of like freaking out and being like, look, why are we here? We shouldn't be messing with these people from the Prime Directive. We have to save ourselves. But then he's sort of like the worm on his neck sort of heals him and sort of brings down his emotions. I liked this because one of my big criticisms of earlier episodes of Prodigy, my cat is playing around with bags that I have in the other room. Anyways, one thing that I said about earlier episodes of Prodigy is I was a little bit frustrated here and there at times with Dahl's characterization of him being a little bit sort of a jerk in earlier episodes. So here I liked it because it was sort of part of the medical stuff that he was going through. So liked that. I also really liked the member of this planet saying, like, look, we get it. We know that we are not Starflight. We are not actually what we are pretending to be, but it doesn't mean that you can't believe in the ideals of it and sort of like try to live up to it. It's kind of like what we all do as fans, right? When we cosplay, we play it's like going to conventions and stuff. Like we're not actually Starfleet, but we like to live up to the ideals of Starfleet. So that felt like a kind of a fan call out. Again, nitpick, big nitpick. I'm fully aware it's a nitpick. Why is the ensign's like uniform, which would apparently be this like big famous relic as part of their civilization, in like the med bay? I would get if like the ensign was like a medical officer or something, but he's like an ensign. So why is like this clear, like this famous artifact of their civilization like in the like sick bay? It was a little bit of a weird moment. I get why it was there for like the story beat and it was very symbolic, but it was just a little bit like, that's a nitpick for me. Again, small stuff, who cares? But then we have Gwen, Rock Talk, and Pog going to find out what the gallows are. It turns out, as I said before, it's the shuttle Galileo, which was one of the, well, There were numerous shuttles, Galileo, on the USS Enterprise, but a famous shuttle nonetheless, going all the way back to one of the early episodes of the original series, the Galileo 7, and one of my personal favorite episodes of the original series, to be quite frank with you, one of the early Great Spock episodes. Anywho, it's a famous shuttle that crash landed on here and was leaking plasma, hence why there were all these problems being caused on this planet because of that crash landing. And eventually, what we learn is that this ensign crashed here and was sort of saved by the civilization and sort of protected and given hope by them, and sort of he can't get back to Starfleet, but he sort of lived out his days with the people here, which was a really cool storyline to see. Two nitpicks, and then this is my last nitpicks. I am sorry that I'm nitpicking. It's just things that I thought about, because I'm a Star Trek nerd overall. I'm liking the episode. I'm just making you aware these are my nitpicks. One question is the ensign left an ensign's log that we eventually hear towards the end of the episode, and I was sort of wondering, it's like, when did he record that? Because the ship had crashed. And so maybe I'm misremembering the timeline. I might be wrong on this, and but I don't remember. Was like, did he go back to the crash ship that was like hanging over this plasma leak thing and leave this log, or was like there's that huge pile of like plasma on the ground there that was just all from the shuttle at that point? It just would have made me wonder about when the ensign left this log, and he's just been allowing it to leak plasma for a long time. The timeline didn't necessarily make sense to me about whether the ensign sort of was able to go back to the crash ship, even though it was precariously placed, and leave the log, or if he just like let this plasma all leak and it caused that problem, and something that he should have caught. Either way, the ensign is doing some weird stuff timeline-wise. That's just my nitpick. My other nitpick, and this is the last one, is I am just confused a little bit about where the protostar is in relation to the Federation constantly. Because, you know, a few episodes ago, we were told that the protostar was on the very edge of Federation space. We were like right at that last, the Starfleet outpost. That was the furthest out Starfleet outpost that we saw. And yet, they are now on a planet that has a crashed original series shuttle. So a shuttle from 100 years ago, which does not feel like a ship from 100 years ago should be near the edge of Federation space. So the only thing I could think of is like, well, maybe that the protostar, they warped in closer to Federation space, but they had already said that they don't want to go to Federation space because they want to try and protect Starfleet for the moment. So why would they go closer to Starfleet if they want to get away from Starfleet? It was just the spatial awareness of where they're at in sort of the galactic map of things has me a bit confused. So again, a nitpick, the trying to tell good stories, and you know, sometimes you have to like set aside some of those nitpicks, and certainly I'm willing to, but it's just one of those things, like if I'm going to nitpick it, might as well. I am looking for criticisms, so that is a good sign, I think, of the episode's quality overall, if I have to dig this deep for that sort of thing. Anywho, going on to the rest of this, we have a fun little beat where Dahl has to rescue the people by the Galileo, and so they couldn't use Admiral Janeway because her AI would go offline due to the interference caused by the plasma, and so he warps up some of these Starflight crew members, and they actually create a TOS bridge on the protostar, so they're able to use the buttons and able to pilot the ship. Loved this. This is what I was talking about, like, as a better homage than the Kobayashi. I understand why they wanted to do the cameos in the previous earlier part of the season. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't like in love with it, and I found some of the audio clips a little bit morbid to my taste. Other people may disagree, totally fine. I thought this was a much more natural reference to like something like the TOS bridge versus like the Enterprise D bridge that we got in that episode. I thought that was really cool. I loved it. They rescue the crew and everyone's saved, and we sort of get a nice little wrapping out of the storyline with our Starflight crew members. And it makes me wonder if like the fact that they are leaving a positive impact on the worlds around them that they visit will ultimately be what persuades Janeway to come over to their side, because clearly they're going to be at antagonism with Admiral Janeway for a while, but then she's going to learn like this doesn't make sense. They've been helping people. So I'm curious if these people are going to come back up because Admiral Janeway is going to encounter them. To wrap out our episodes, we get a nice little second contact reference. Like the second contact rules are kind of fuzzy, which is like, oh, that's a nice little Lower Decks reference there. I thought that was kind of fun. But beyond all of that, that sort of wraps out our episode on a nice ending. We got a mystery with Murph. We got Admiral Janeway still going on, and we have our protostar crew looking for ways to stop their ship from destroying all of Starfleet. So I like where we're going. This is another fantastic episode. My nitpicks aside, and again, I know they're nitpicks. But yeah, this is another great episode of Prodigy. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below, though. What did you think of this episode? And beyond all of that, I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.